Everybody here. It's been a great experience over the past couple of years building the research programs at MPG with you all. And I'm going to talk about the mission and goals and try not to steal anybody's thunder going through everybody else's talks. So I'm not going to really get into too much of the actual research work that we've done over the past couple of years. So that's what we'll be spending the rest of the day on. I wanted to go over a few things that we've done and then new directions that we're taking. So our mission is to promote conservation generally. And we do that through restoration, research, education, and sharing information. And at MPG Ranch, the goals are to inventory what's there. We want to know what lives there, and then describe the interactions between the species that live there, and then work on developing new strategies for restoring ecosystem functions in degraded systems. And then we want to use that to improve restoration practices. So there's an outward component to the mission. And then support and train conservationists in the future. I'm going to hit first on the information sharing, because I kind of want us to think about this as we go through. And in particular, like field notes and some I just want us to think about like what we can do to share what we're learning more and better with each other. Hopefully a conference and reports and updates are great. They'll go onto the web and we'll hopefully see them. And then there's also like the little observations that we make where we have, we see something cool. And oh, I didn't advance it. So that's like the fun current stuff that's part of your experience as a researcher at MPG. It shows what we as professionals are turned on by out there. Like, what do we see? Whether it's I think I've got a laser pointer, like a roadside that got colonized by arrowleaf balsam root, where every other roadside in Missoula County is colonized by knapweed. I mean, that's a great picture. Whoever saw a roadside get colonized by arrowleaf balsam root? What is going on? And then, like, if you see a two-headed goose, we should. It's fun to share that information. It's fun to share it among ourselves and also with Paul, who's funding the operations here. So, and also, if you call that a KGO, a double-headed KGO, it won't be as readily available. You're wondering what a KGO is? I think that's the 4-letter code for a Canada goose. And then, what's the 6-letter code for a ball sack? Sorry, I really didn't know that. It'd be better to just call it balsam root. All right, so, and if you see, a beautiful landscape or a beautiful picture, it's always cool to share beauty among us, and we share these observations on Facebook or on field notes that can go up onto the website. If you see your buddy getting attacked by a prairie falcon, that should definitely, I think I attributed this picture to you, Adam. Did you take this?
I did not.
Who took this one? Kerr took this one, okay. I just thought it was probably Adam, but I just like that picture. That, that's part of the experience that should be, that we need to, that'll help us learn maybe to run when you see see William about to release a prairie falcon. And then field notes that show the, the picture that started the Viking name for Jeff. But you know, good stuff. Let's think about ways that we can share our experience and share what we've learned. So back to the mission and goals. Inventorying species present. A lot of us are involved with inventories of birds and mammals and lichens. Becca's going to talk a little bit about lichen surveys around just what lives there. It's an important to think about all the different groups of organisms. Mike Sawaya from Sonopa Research Institute Research Associates is going to talk to us about bear monitoring. We'll have lots of information coming out from lots of talks by Sharon and Rob and William and Kate and Adam on just figuring out what birds live here. And then when we're working out the interactions between species, we also need to know what microbes live there and how the microbes interact with the weeds, interact with the other plants. So these talks, these areas of research fit into our goals by wanting to learn about how stuff above ground interacts with stuff below ground. Sorry, I think it's a great picture, Alexi. I just put it in a lot of presentations. It's by Alan. Okay, so moving on to the restoring degraded habitats. I'm going to talk a little bit about our philosophy on what restoration is and how we think about going about it. And to do that, we need to back up and look at the history of the ranch and why it looks like it does. And we can identify by doing that habitats that are in pretty good shape that don't really need a lot of work, and then habitats where we do want to do some work. So the next few slides will show the history and then the process of prioritizing restoration areas. We start with the human history of MPG, and there have been people there for thousands and thousands of years. We don't have very much information about the people that were there before the horse culture. Once the Native Americans got horses and the Salish lived in the area, we have oral histories and we have written accounts that were produced during the end of the Salish period. But I have this timeline that shows that there were, according to the accounts of the Salish elders, stories passed down, there were a lot more Salish living in the valley before Lewis and Clark came, before first white contact, than there had been previously. And this is because there was, once horses arrived in the Great Plains, diseases started to spread much more rapidly. And so plagues started to come through the region. Then the first settlement of whites in the valley was, I'm going to go back to Lewis and Clark in a minute, was in 1841. In 1852, though, it was when Mullen Trail came through, and there was a lot of settlement started after that. This was an open range grazing period, and the McKay family occupied that area. They would have their sheep and cattle moving from where MPG is now in the winter out to summer. The sheep would go over to Grangeville, Idaho, and the cows would go over to the Front Range. All the way with no fences, just walk right over there. So that changed with that changed a lot as private property and fencing developed. So there was also there were a lot of animals in the 1870s here, and a lot of grazing by sheep and cattle. And then there was a dryland farming period where most of the flatter areas at MPG were tilled and farmed for winter wheat, especially after World War I, when there was a spike at the end and just after World War I, there was a spike in wheat prices, and it made sense to farm as much wheat as possible, and the ancestors of the Schraders did that and plowed up anything that they could get anything they could drag a plow over. Then after that period, there was a rest when wheat prices went way down, the Great Depression happened, and the place was basically abandoned for a period. There was little agriculture going on. This period probably gave some, like the bitter brush that we see now, a chance to grow up without competition for a little while. The ages are about the same. And then in the 70s, the Schrader brothers turned the ranch into a agricultural production ranch for raising small grain crops, alfalfa hay, and cattle, the emphasis being on cattle. And they started out running 400 cow-calf pairs a year, and that number started dropping as range conditions deteriorated and weed invasions caused their forage base to decline in quality. And by the 2006 and 7, they were able to run about 300 cow-calf pairs. It's also been getting drier all through the Schrader period. Anyhow, these range weeds were a major influence on what we see now, because the Schraders were spraying, they were trying to put a bunch of kids through college. I'm not trying to judge their agricultural practices. They were great farmers, but they were using broadleaf herbicides abundantly during the cattle production years. And this is our first aerial photograph, and this is of the bottom of Tongue Creek. You can see that spring that has a stock tank you see as you come around the bend and you're going up the hill. And this is the draw, and you can see the shrubby cover in here. Lots of trees and bushes and gentler slopes here. And then here's the same draw in August 2011, and the shrubs are gone. By 1940, there'd been a lot of grazing already, so we don't know exactly what all, how shrubby these draws would be under different management practices. But in the rest of, like, this area is the area between Tongue Creek and Sheep Camp, and it's been grazed, it's been planted for dryland wheat and then planted with exotic forage grasses for cattle production, and then sprayed a bunch of times to keep down weeds. So the vegetation there is very changed. There doesn't resemble in any way, it doesn't have a lot of diversity, I guess I would say. But the combination of influences from the past have led to landscapes that have very, in some areas, have very low plant diversity. And what we have is, in this draw, which is a little draw at the right in between Tongue Creek and Sheep Camp, and we have a pretty classic cheatgrass on the south-facing aspect, spurge on the north-facing aspect, and then exotic forage grasses planted all around. So what do we do? What's restoration? And that's where we think about, should we go figure out what Lewis and Clark saw and turn back the clock? and try and get that plant community. They said some pretty weird things while they were traveling down the Bitterroot. And here's some quotes from their journals. Their journals are available online in a lot of places. So this is Clark as he's going through Stevensville. The bottoms as also the hills, and this is his grammar and spelling, not mine. The bottoms as also the hills, stony, bad land, some pine on the creeks and mountains, and partial on the hills to the east side. And then they're coming down past Devi to Florence, and they're just south of where MPG is. And he says again, proceeded on down the valley where is poor stony land and encamped on the right side of the river. They were traveling north, so they're on the really close to MPG at this point. And I observed great quantities of a peculiar sort of prickly pear. And that's sort of an understatement. They had two guys carrying their dog through the valley because the dog was so pricked with prickly pears that his feet were infested and he couldn't walk. And Lewis was hobbling along. And I mean, they were wearing leather moccasins and trying to walk through this huge amount of cactus. Why is there so much cactus? I mean, this land that they're walking through it sounds like it's better now than then. I mean, we've got a lot of cactus, but anyhow, then they crossed a river to a large road on the left of the river in an open valley. And they were with Indians the whole time. Their whole trip through the valley, they were accompanied by people, and they were staying at villages, and there were people everywhere. Like, wow, what's a big road doing? I mean, you don't really think about Lewis and Clark, at least I haven't before I started reading this, traveling along on roads, but they were, and this was the road to the buffalo, and the Salish were going out to the Great Plains to hunt buffalo and then bring back enough meat to see them through the winter. They needed a lot of horses for that, and horses were wealth. And then this thing that Lewis said, this is at Lolo, when they're camped at Traveler's Rest, they saw some Indians that were trying to chase down some people who'd stolen one of their horses. And he said the Indians were mounted on very fine horses, of which they have a great abundance. That is, each man in the nation possesses from 20 to 100 head. That's a lot of horses. If there were, at this period, the cultural histories are, for whatever they're worth, between 2,000 and 8,000 Salish. Lewis and Clark were calling them by a couple different names, but Flathead was one of them. 2,000 to 8,000 people, a man to total population ratio of about 1 to 4. This is down, though, from maybe 20,000 to Native Americans in this region using the Flathead Valley, Mission Valley, and Bitterroots for their wintering. Anyhow, I would like to just posit that turning back the clock to what was there isn't restoration. We need to be thinking about restoring functions rather than particular plant communities, especially since Lewis and Clark, when they came through, that was in September, and they were worried about getting through the passes. It was snowing, so the mountains were white with snow, and they're sitting there in Lolo like, okay, let's take a little break, and then we got to get to Idaho, and there's not going to be any game because the game's already migrated out of the mountains. And then on their way back through, they have to wait until almost July to get back from Idaho across Lolo, across the passes. Man, you wouldn't have, and then when they were doing it, they were belly deep in snow, struggling with their horses. It's not, if you tried to restore a plant community to what they saw, first of all, you wouldn't really know what to do. And then you'd restore the wrong community that would be suited for a different climate, a different time. Then we're gonna look at some maps now. This is Baldy, for those of you, most of you are real familiar with what you're going to see in these maps, but in case you're not, this is Baldy Summit that you see as you're driving south down the Bitterroot. This is the Bitterroot River bottomlands, and the orchard house is here, and the entrance is here, a little baldy. This is Tongue Creek, which we looked at the aerial photograph where the bottom of it is denuded by herbicide applications, and then sheep camp. And then up higher, where you can't get a truck as easily and can't spray as easily, and it's steep, then the draws have shrubby vegetation in them. So what we did early on was establish a grid of points, and there's 575 points, each separated by 250 meters that cover the ranch. And at each of these points, we've developed, the botany crew, led by Mel, has gone and done a vegetation transect every foot for 50 feet in 4 directions from each point. They've put down a rod and recorded the height of the first plant to hit the rod, and then the type of plant, and then the second and third plant. And then a bunch of other variables, slope, aspect, canopy cover. And then the avian science team, led by Kate, has gone to each of these points from two or three times a year. At first we went to each one, for the first 2 years we went to each point 3 times, once in the winter and twice in the summer, and then we don't go to all of them anymore, but we can subsample within this now, and we have a good idea of what birds are in each point. And this is good for making pretty maps. So we'll look at some pretty maps, and then we'll look at some how to actually analyze the data. But so if this is a map where I'm going to call it a heat map. Whenever you look at one of these maps, red is going to be more, and blue is going to be less. And you can see in this map that there's a kind of a band of blue, cool colors of low bird species richness, where there's 1 to 5 or 6 bird species detected at a point count. And then the Bitterroot River bottomlands are full of birds. They're an Audubon important bird area. And then up in the mountains, there's, and in these shrubby draws, and thanks, Debbie made these maps. I didn't put her name on this one. I put her name on a few, but anyhow, oh yeah, thanks Debbie. So it really looks like there's a pretty good relationship between the proportion of exotic, on here, the proportion of exotic plant hits. How many times did that rod touch what proportion of the times did the rod touch a native plant or an exotic plant? And these areas are all exotic plants, and these areas don't have very many birds, species. They've got kind of a lot of birds. I mean, lots of little grasshopper sparrows and meadowlarks and stuff. So then I'm going to show you here, this map shows plantings of agricultural, either exotic forage grasses like crested wheatgrass or intermediate wheatgrass, or where there were crops, the colored areas here. And these are areas where Dan later on is going to be talking about plans for removing these. Each of those colored areas is a planted area either with exotic forage grasses or crops. And Dan will be talking about plans for taking these areas and converting them back to complex, diverse plant communities. And I didn't say native, because what is native, and how can we address that is a topic that we talk about a lot. Okay, so yeah, then this slide shows different plans. Dan will be talking about later on, but different strategies for converting the exotic forage grasses. So that's one way we can look at restoration priorities with a grid of samples. We can also make maps showing the distribution of some weeds of importance. This heat map shows cheatgrass and where cheatgrass occurs. I saw you frown, Tegan. Like, there's kind of a lot of cheatgrass out there, and knapweed and spurge. But it's kind of cool because you can see like, oh wait, we got to go get that. We got to go check out that spot and kill that because it's an isolated spurge infestation, and there's a few. So we can go and prioritize areas where we might be able to just wipe out a small population rather than have to treat a giant area with broad spectrum herbicides. It's just what we've already done in some of the red areas. You can also, so this is when the bird crews go out, they also record lots of other observations. And it's great to be able to start to learn about the ecological roles of creatures and how their abundance changes over time. But this map shows where bird point counters have detected ground squirrels. And the blue X's, and there's a lot of them, are detections only in 2012. They weren't detected in previous years. Where they were detected in 2010, 11, and 12 as green X's, and where they were only detected in 2010, and there's a few of these too, we don't really know why we're detecting the ground squirrels in some years, in some places, and not in others. But I like that there's more lately, last year. Hopefully we'll see that trend continue because they feed baby eagles. And that's a picture Alan took of a ground squirrel serving its purpose. They have lots of other roles too, but that's a really good role. We want more ground squirrels for more raptors. We wanted I'd love to see some of our grasslands that have no holes. You walk across them and like there's a rodent hole, maybe like 2 if you walk from the orchard house all the way up to where the bitterbrush starts. There's like hardly any comparatively little evidence of rodent activity compared to the 8 Mile Prairie area where there's just rodents everywhere. And where there's rodents everywhere, there's raptors everywhere. So we want to see, as well as more diverse plant communities, more diverse insect and animal and bird communities in those areas. We're going to talk about the spotted Toey a little bit, not in reference really to the draws, which I think Kate will cover some. It's one of the species she's going to talk about. But here's a heat map for the spotted Toey, where there's map is by Debbie, and it's based on the grid point count bird data. But there's not really a lot of them anywhere, but they're associated with places that are kind of shrubby. And this should make sense to people who are familiar with the spotted Toey. You only see this bird really where it likes to flit about in the shrubs. So where there's shrubs, you'll probably see this bird. This is an example. We're going to have an example of how we want to learn more about interactions between species using familiar species. Oh, sorry, this one got out of line. I'm going to skip it. So here is the, we're going to come back to the Toey though. This map shows an ordination of plant communities based on the survey of the grid points. And the colors on it, red is dominated by the same, it has the same most abundant plant species in it. Green has, and this is, I think these are mostly, although it's the bitterroot bottomlands, I think that a lot of those sites are dominated by Kentucky bluegrass. There's a lot of exotic plants in the bottomlands, but there's trees and shrubs too. So there's a lot of bird diversity and water. Anyhow, the blues and yellows are exotic forage grasses, and then the beiges are dominated by cheatgrass. Anyhow, the numbers refer to a category that the plant community is lumped into. On our next slide, we display the ordination on two axes, and this is, Dan made this slide and did the ordination that I'm talking about. And we did this last year, and we're working on trying to figure out the best way to do this. And we're not probably quite there yet, but this seems to be a way we can learn about interactions between species. So say we've got 40 different plant communities displayed on this map. On this ordination, the little triangles, the closer one triangle is to another triangle, the more similar the plant community is by this ordination. And going on to the next slide, so like these are too small for you to read, but these are the 8s and the 9s are the floodplain, and then these are the 8s and the 9s. So this is a map of the spotted Toey distribution. You can see that we get the birds along these draws, and a little bit up in the forest too. Occasionally, there's detections up there. How can we display the relationship between plant communities and birds or bird communities? We could do this in either direction. So this slide, it shows this is like a topographic map of bird abundance. And if you read the numbers like a 2 indicates that, I'm going to back up a second. Those 8s and 9s on this ordination, if it's an 8 or a 9, it's like floodplain vegetation. The blues, you saw they were dominated by the exotic forage grasses. They're over here. Agricultural areas are over here, and they're circled, so you can see that within this circle are plant communities that are dominated by cheatgrass, and they're similar in a lot of ways. And then cheatgrass is the beige ones, big sagebrush, and then bird abundance in these is mapped on top of that with the topo lines. So 2, it's going to like, well, let's start at 0. Does not like the introduced forage grasses. It's almost never detected out in, if it was detected in an exotic forage grass area, it would probably have been carried there by a falcon and dropped. Or else soon it would be carried by a falcon somewhere else. And then, so there's 0, 0.5, it doesn't really like agricultural areas, cheatgrass dominated areas, and it's sort of indifferent to the floodplain. As you get up to this higher areas, draws, 2. Like above 2 are the areas that are draws, and then down here it's also detected in the sage. So, we see the toeys out in the sage, usually where there's a chokecherry bush growing in the sage or something a little thicker. But this makes sense in terms of, like, if you're familiar. Where am I? Okay, is that your first warning? Okay, good. I'm almost there. Then what we want to do is use these pretty complex and comprehensive data sets to learn about species we're not as familiar with. Like Mary Rose is going to start a survey of pollinators. I don't know about the native bees, and maybe not very many of us do. But how can we most effectively start to learn about the relationships? Probably through something like this, but if you guys have better ideas, please bring them up. Um, when I think that's when we do this, though, we want to use the big grid. We don't want to have to go look at pollinators at every point on that grid. We want to subsample and use the subsample at points that correspond to plant communities in here, and in here, and in here, and then we can use our vegetation maps to subsample other layers of biological organization. We can look at microbial community structure and soils and points that we get from Ordination, so that we don't have to go take 570 soil samples to make get the same information. Hopefully we'll be able to use the bird and vegetation data more effectively to design new studies in the coming years to start learning more and more quickly. So that's the ordination plot. I just figured it wasn't really a talk without an ordination. So we're done with that. We're back to training and supporting conservationists. I think we've done in the past, not to belittle Kate and Bo's efforts. They've been doing a lot of work on education and outreach from the beginning. It's been a priority, but it's been Kate brought like 2,000 students to the ranch in 2010, the first year we were out there. But we just keep in mind there's a lot of stuff that we can bring people along with. Like Rob, I think, does a really good job with bringing along citizen volunteers and just people who are interested, and especially kids that are. I like this picture because this kestrel's about to take a divot out of Rob's finger, and I didn't put in the more gruesome one but the more gruesome one is better, because like most of the time if something bites a chunk out of your finger, like most people's reaction would be to go like this or maybe squeeze, but there's not that many people that can just be calm while the divot is taken and and get the work done. But he's also clearly making a big impression on Nicholas's little buddy Sam there. And these conservationists of the future that Joshua Lisbon has come on this year, and he's done a great job organizing work crews as well as educational opportunities for the future conservationists. And like this last summer we started a program with Next Up Wilderness, and you'll see these kids around again this summer, same ones. There's a lot of work that they can help, that volunteers and interns and youths can help with too, as well as just seeing the research side of things. Here they're collecting decumbent air layering bitterbrush seeds. I think they look like a little troop of chimpanzees though. Like they're plucking, like something. I don't know, they kind of act like a little troop of chimpanzees. And then, bringing kids out is a great way to think about what's out there. Still don't know why that mullein plant didn't have any leaves and was taller than the mullein plant with all those leaves. But Casey, Mike's son, was definitely thinking about it. I don't think Kate had a real good explanation for that either. So MPG is a great place to learn your weeds. You can see some knapweed and some cheatgrass and a basic invasion meltdown. So, and then new directions we've started in the last year. We're working with collaborators at the University of Chicago on the Earth Microbiome Project to look at the soil microorganisms and soil microbial diversity at MPG and enter it into databases that will allow us to compare what's here to what's in other places around the world. Ilva's she's actually worked on it for a couple years, but it's really hopefully going to be getting underway with weed microbe biogeography, looking at how weeds and how weeds interact with weeds, if weeds interact with microbes here and abroad. I've got to close up here. And then we're looking at starting more regional projects with sharp-tailed grouse restoration and collaborating with FWP on that, and also on a region-wide study of elk use of different habitats. I'm going to skip those, and hopefully I can play that. I just want to be sure to thank the crews that get the work done. Okay, we got a minute for questions and comments. Rob? We don't have to watch the whole thing. This is Rob Dominic, and he's going to talk to us about the blood levels in wintering golden eagles and wintering eagles at the traps.
Run to the bathroom real quick.
Yes.